Well, welcome everybody. My name is Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and it's a great honor today to host the writer-director Charlie Kaufman and his new film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Charlie is a four-time Academy Award nominated screenwriter known for Anomalisa, Scenic Doki, New York, adaptation, being Joe Malkovich, and he won an Academy Award for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, among many other film honors. Charlie's debut novel, And Kind, which I encourage everybody to go out and purchase and read it, And Kind, was published this summer to outstanding reviews and was described as an astonishing creation by the New York Times Book Review. His new film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, is one of my favorite films this year. Demands your attention. It makes you think, and it invites you to develop your own interpretation of what is happening. It was described by the London Evening Standard as that is so good that it induces separation anxiety. So please welcome Charlie Kaufman. Thank you so much for being here, Charlie.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
I already mentioned before we went live that I have seen your film several times. And one of the things that at first is so deceptive, you would think that it's so simple. You have this car ride, and then you have the visit to the farm, and then you go to the high school. But it looks like it was very difficult to film. Was it?
We didn't have a lot of time to film it. So we had to shoot the whole thing in 24 days. And all of the stuff in the car is green screen. So, and we shot it in its entirety of those scenes. For every camera angle, we shot it in its entirety. So we were doing basically like 20-minute takes over and over and over again. So the actors could have a sort of continuity in their dynamic and their performance. So it was difficult to get it done, but I had a really good crew and a really wonderful cast, and so we made it through.
Speaking of crew, this is the first time you work with this incredible cinematographer, Lucas Zal. Can you tell us about choosing him?
I liked Lukash because, I mean, I love Cold War and I loved Ida. I love the way those movies looked. And then when I ended up speaking to him, which was, in this sort of configuration on Zoom or whatever it was, Skype at the time, I liked that he was so excited about the script. He felt the script was really important. And first of all, I'm really impressed that he's Polish and he read it in English and understood it. Like for me, that's just an impressive thing because I'm not bilingual. But that it was so moving to him made me feel like the conversations we would have would be about what the film was about, not just camera angles, and that turned out to be the case. We had a lot of really long conversations about philosophy and memory and fantasy and aging and all of that stuff.
Why? There were so many choices that I love that you guys, the two of you, must have worked out. Why the choice of the aspect ratio change of the film?
The 4:3 aspect ratio was something he wanted to do, and when we were, we were going out looking at locations and stuff. He would take photographs and he would take them in that ratio, and we really liked it. There was something about it that felt very confined. Very focused. We talked a lot about the idea that when you're remembering something or fantasizing about something, you're focused on the thing that you're focused on. There isn't a lot of geography. And this was a way possibly to simulate it. Netflix was not into the idea of this aspect ratio. They had felt that audiences would think there was something wrong with their screen and would turn it off. and so we tried other aspect ratios while we were just scouting. And this was the one that we were really convinced was correct. So we told them we were going to do it, and they allowed it.
There is so much rich imagery when it comes to patterns and color and texture. How was that uh, working with the production designer and your costume designer?
Yeah, that was a big thing. We were initially going to build a farmhouse, and we couldn't afford it. So we found a farmhouse, and I think that we didn't really have a lot of money for production design. So we started talking about patterns, and we saw a lot of old photographs had this kind of a sort of complexity of patterns, wallpaper and patterned, outfits and against each other. And we thought it was a really interesting look. And since we were trying to create a film that felt like a memory, like the way you might remember your childhood home with such specificity.
Mm.
So Molly Hughes and Melissa Toth and Wukash Zal and I, decided on what things should look like and how they would interact with each other. And we spent a lot of time with it. We looked at a lot of wallpaper patterns. Molly was able to find actual antique wallpaper and was able to purchase it, and that's what we used.
Yeah, I love the opening sequence with the obsession that the camera has with the wallpaper,
Yeah.
and I love, which it says a lot about the film, that at first it's so beautiful, but then the camera lingers on it and it starts getting a little dark, should I say? Um,
Yeah, I mean, you see really beautiful patterns, and then you see an empty wheelchair, and like there's some story that you're not entirely getting, but it's being alluded to. Yeah, and the reason that I have those shots is because I wanted to have those things that a child would remember about their home, like the little knickknacks that you see, and the wallpaper, and all of that stuff, the sort of low angle stuff of the dog toys, things that I felt would be remembered as a child grown up.
Correct. Going back to, you mentioned the pattern, the wallpaper, the costumes. I mean, the sweaters, what they're wearing, it's also heavy with pattern. With, her dress has the flower pattern, and we're not used to seeing that sort of contrast, heavy pattern against the wallpaper pattern. Can you talk about that?
Well, that goes back to those sort of old photographs that we saw that had that sort of aspect to it. And Melissa, who did the costumes, and has done the costumes for, she did Eternal Sunshine, she did Synecdoche,
Mm-hmm.
she did the pilot that I did that hadn't aired. So I've worked with her before. She was very engaged in that, and Molly was very engaged in the patterns of the wallpaper. And we were looking for stuff that would, like with Wukash, we were looking for stuff that would give you a sense of space. Like with the wallpaper, you would see from the dining room through to the living room, and you would see the two different wallpapers at the same time. There's a very small farmhouse that we were actually in, and we were trying to sort of create this feeling of spaciousness, and we used that to do that. But yeah, and the other thing about the clothing is that it changes. So we have very similar clothing, but the colors are changing, and that was something that I think the patterns helped almost mask, because people don't necessarily notice that it's changing because there's so much else going on, and I wanted it to be sort of subliminal.
I mean, I want to go back to the changing of the customs, but there was one point that you brought up that I don't want to forget, is that, and it has to do with interpretation, is, to me, the costumes, the heavy pattern and the wallpaper pattern, it almost felt like they were disappearing into the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Was that
Yeah, that was something we had talked about. That sort of like it's almost like it's like there's so much going on that you can't see the person anymore. You can just see the patterns, And then we did, we did talk about that.
Was it difficult for continuity's sake, the changing, like for example, there's like 6 versions of the coat.
Yeah.
It's slightly changed color. The dress, there is,
Yeah, it was very difficult and very time consuming, and we had to stop and change things, and we were changing other things as well, hairstyles and makeup, and both Toni and David have lots of different prosthetic makeup sort of versions of themselves that we had to contend with. So yeah, it was very time consuming to do that, and also, like, everybody had to be on the same page, because the makeup people and the hair people and the costume people had to kind of all come in and change stuff really quickly and then go out. So everybody needed to know what was coming next.
You use musical theater, Oklahoma, of course, and how, tell us about using musical theater as a key to the story.
Well, I mean, sometimes when I'm writing, I come upon things in stages, but I mean, what happened here was that this is based on a book, a novel by Ian Reeve of the same name, and I wanted to have the life of the janitor, which is not in the book, kind of running parallel to the other part of the story. So I knew he was going to be a night janitor, and I was trying to think of things that would happen at a high school at night, and I, thought about a play rehearsal, and I knew Oklahoma because I'd been in it as a kid.
What role did you play in Oklahoma?
Well, so I can't sing. So when I did plays and they were musicals, I would get cast in the non-singing parts. And so I played a character called Slim, who has 2 lines, and not a memorable character, but it's what I did. But I was there obviously for the rest of it. And when I was thinking about Oklahoma, I realized that there are sort of parallels in terms of the themes of Oklahoma and the story that we were telling, specifically in relation to Judd. And I wanted, so it seemed like the thing I wanted to use, and we got the rights from the estates of Rodgers and Hammerstein after some difficulty, but they gave it to us, and so that's where that came from.
And one of the most stunning moments in the film is the Agnes de Mille Dream Ballet that you use. Can you talk about? I mean, that came also from the idea of using Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I always loved that in Oklahoma. I love the Dream Ballet because it's so weird, and I love the idea of the doubles coming in and taking the place of the actors. It's just such a strange thing to see in a musical from that period. And I felt also that it kind of, the doubling seemed, the dreaminess of that seemed like it would work really well in this story. So yeah, so that's what we did. We had to write a new score because they wouldn't let us use the Dream Ballet score, because they would only let us use things that we weren't going to change. And since we weren't going to do their Dream Ballet, but our Dream Ballet, my composer, Jay Wadley, composed a ballet, and then it was choreographed, and the dancers were amazing, and choreographer was amazing, and so it was a lot of fun to watch it happen.
And in the last scene, you use "Lonely Room," which is such a complex song from Oklahoma, which is sung by Judd and in Oklahoma, and sometimes it's cut from productions. It was cut from the movie. Yeah. What attracted you to that particular song, "Lonely Room"?
Well, like I said, I was in Oklahoma as a kid, and I always loved that song, and I always loved that character. The most interesting character to me is Judd, because there's such a real darkness to him in contrast to everybody else in the story, and it seemed very similar to his struggle, seemed very similar to Jake's struggle. So I wanted to put it in there, and it turns out that Jesse Plemons is a really good singer, and he had never done any kind of, he sings, he plays the guitar and he sings, but he'd never done musical theater before, or that kind of singing. So when we went to record it, it was like he was really nervous, but he nailed it the first time. It was really exciting.
Um, and the ballet sequence that we speak about, the dream sequence, it's you did it in one single take, which is the way that it was done. Am I wrong? Is that the way that it was done in the movie where it in Oklahoma, where it's just one single take?
I don't remember in the movie. I watched it a lot before we did ours, but I don't remember if it was a single take. We did it to a certain extent. I think we did it out of necessity with a steady cam. It was a matter of time for us, and we wanted that kind of fluidity. It ends up being a couple of different takes because the lighting down one hallway then had to be adjusted for the lighting down the other hallway. There's two hallways intersecting. And then of course, when she runs down that hallway and goes into the gymnasium, it's a completely different shot. And actually a few shots at that point.
I hope you don't mind me asking so many.
No, I don't mind anything.
I'm such a film geek, and I love all the making of behind the Snow is almost like a fifth character in the movie. Was that always your intention?
Yeah, it was so important to me to have the snow, and it was so difficult. We had so many problems, and that was certainly in terms of our shooting difficulties. That was the largest difficulty, was the practical snow, getting it to work, getting it to look right from take to take. We had all different kinds of snow, artificial snow that we were using. Some of it just looked terrible. And the more expensive snow that we used was too expensive for us to have a lot of it. So they would sweep it up. The effects people would sweep it up between takes and put it back, and we would reuse it. And then ultimately we had to do a lot of it in post with, computer effects. And that was also very difficult to get it to look real. There was a lot of back and forth between the effects people and us trying to get it right. And it was very time consuming and, and expensive.
Mm-hmm. I love the scenes in the car because it feels like a snow globe effect with them inside the car. You mentioned Jay Wadley, your composer, and I have to ask you about the vintage commercial that you not only tasked him with a ballet dream sequence, but with the 50s commercial jingle.
Yeah, I mean, Jay was introduced to me by my producer, Anthony Bregman. Early on, I was planning on having no score except for the musical theater stuff and the commercial. So Jay was probably just going to do that. And it got more extensive as we went on. But Jay has a background he does commercials. He does all sorts of jingles. That's his day job. He does all sorts of commercial music. And so I felt confident that he would be able to do that. I wrote the lyrics. Jay did the score for it. Deanna Story sang it. She's the person who sang the songs in Synecdoche, New York. So we brought her in to do the thing. Originally, it was going to be a Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen would not let us use them. So we had to make up a fake place. And I had seen a very old Dairy Queen commercial when I was thinking it was going to be a Dairy Queen, and it was really creepy, and I wanted to use it in the movie. But since we couldn't use Dairy Queen, we had to make our own commercial. And so that's how that happened.
You worked with David Thewlis before in Anomalisa. Was he always the first choice to play the father?
Once I was looking to cast it, it was always David. Yeah, I don't generally think about actors when I'm writing, but yeah, David was I think probably the first person cast.
And tell us about Jesse Buckley, who is phenomenal in this. And as I mentioned, I've seen it several times, and the amount of words that she has to perform, and she does them beautifully.
Yeah, she's amazing. And yeah, I had cast another actress and she backed out or dropped out or whatever. And I was trying to figure out who to cast, and I was talking to my production designer, Molly, on the phone, and she happened to be in London. And I said, I don't know who to cast for this. And she was with the director of the movie she was working on. And this woman said, he has to cast Jessie Buckley. And I didn't know who she was. So I watched this movie, Beast, and I was blown away by her performance. And so I really, really wanted her. And what I did was, and I was thinking about other actresses too, but I was sort of focused on Jessie, as I sent these actresses the poem to read and record as an audition tape. And Jessie, talk about lines, she memorized it. By the next day, she sent the recording back. And it was just so beautiful the way she did it. And it convinced me that she was the person. So I cast her, and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, no, she's tremendous. And Mr. Plemons, how did it come about choosing him?
Again, I had somebody else who had to drop out, and I thought of Jesse because I think he's amazing, and I think he's a very internal actor, and he's a very quiet actor, but there's so much going on in his face in such a subtle way. I remember first seeing him in Breaking Bad and being sort of astounded by him, because that character was so dark, but there was such a quiet to him that I just wanted him, and I asked him, and he said yes. So I was very pleased about that. And another person I love Jesse and Jessie as people and as actors. They're both amazing people.
And then you cast one of the fiercest actresses, Toni Collette. I mean, she's completely fearless.
Yeah, she is amazing also. And you know, I've known Toni's work since Muriel's Wedding, and I've always loved her work. And I actually met with her many years ago, briefly for a drink. And but she's always in my head. Yeah, and then I thought about her recently because I'd seen her in this British TV series,
Wanderlust.
Yeah, and she's so good in it. And so you saw the series, yes?
Yeah.
So there's this episode where she's being kind of dressed down by her therapist, and she's not saying it. It's just on Toni's face.
Correct. Yeah.
The stuff that's going past her on her face, I was just astounded by it, and that was fairly recently. So she was right fresh in my head. Yeah, Toni can do anything.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I'm pretty sure you saw her in Hereditary, and
I did see her in Hereditary, and yeah, and you know, I think there's this sort of idea that I cast her because of Hereditary, and I didn't. Although she's amazing in Hereditary, but had I been thinking about Hereditary, I might have hesitated, because I don't want people to compare them and think I cast her for this thing. But certainly there are differences in the performances, and they're very different. But you know, the sort of the mother sort of character in that way.
And I think that you're so good with actors. Is it, I mean, you alluded to you did not allude, you mentioned that you've acted when you were younger. Is that, what is it about you and actors that you get such great performances out of them?
I mean, you know, I like actors, and I like what they do, and I like talking to them about what they do because it interests me because of my background and because it's about psychology and about emotion and stuff like that, which is interesting to me. But I mean, I think the truth of it is, I hire good actors, and they're good. I mean, I don't have to do much with them. You know, I'm there, I'm present. I try to help them if they're confused about a moment, but they're not. They rarely are. So that's my secret. Is that I hire good people.
Mm-hmm. And what was it about Mr. Reed's novel that attracted you to adapt it?
Well, I was looking for something, that I could maybe get financed. And I read this, and I liked that it was very dreamy, and I liked the sort of the delving into the irrational. That always appeals to me. And it was very small, so I felt like I might be able to get financing for it. 4 characters, more or less, 3 locations, and it just seemed like it would be simple. And I was having such a difficult time getting movies financed that I thought maybe this would be, and it also sort of existed within a genre, which I think appeals to studios, and that's basically why.
Mm-hmm. And what was the most challenging thing about the process of adapting the novel?
I think the most challenging thing for me was trying to figure out how to make the young woman a character who actually interacted and had her own autonomy and agency within this sort of framework of being not real. I needed to have that happen. I felt like it was important for a movie. I felt it was important for an actor. I felt it was important for the other actor to be able to play something. I'm always, no matter how sort of far afield in terms of surrealism, my things are, they have to be grounded in stuff that's playable by human beings within human emotion. So I needed to figure that out for both characters, for Jesse and for Jesse. And that was my biggest struggle.
And did you have any, was the author totally willing for you to?
Yeah, I think Ian, he likes me, he liked my work, he knew who I was, and he was very excited. It was his first novel, and the idea that this was going to be made into a movie and that I was going to do it excited him. And he understood, because we talked about it, that I was going to have to take it and make it mine, because it's a translation and it's my translation. So I have to sort of it has to make sense to me. So we had a lot of conversations and we became friends. And he seems to be very happy with the movie. He says he is, but he was very generous in that regard.
But he wasn't involved in, he didn't like read the script and make.
He did. We sent him the script before we went into production. He read it. He liked it. He didn't give notes or anything. He was really pleased with it. He and I talked early on, before the movie was even sort of in pre-production. We talked about actors and stuff like that. And we had conversations where, we engaged in that way. But he wasn't involved in the production. He did come to visit the set for a few days.
There is, online and friends of mine are asking so much about, what is this, what happens, and they want things explained. And I keep telling, and some of my students are listening right now to this, and I tell people that this movie is about your interpretation, and that there's no right and wrong, that you take in what you want to take out of it. How do you feel about it? You wanted it to be open-ended for people to.
Yeah, everything I do, it is my goal. I feel like any creative work, in my opinion, any valuable creative work is an interaction between the person who created it and the person who witnesses it. Views it or reads it or whatever form it's in. And it doesn't exist, the work doesn't exist without the viewer. And so you want to engage the viewer and allow them to have things that resonate with them, with their experience of the world, with their own lives. And so my goal is to sort of have it full enough that can happen in different ways for different people, rather than lead people by the nose to a conclusion that's not interesting. To me, it's not interesting. It is not something I want in the art that I engage with. So I try not to give it to people. And so I will never say what the movie is about. And I will never say anyone's wrong in their interpretation, even if they say mean things about it or about me in the process, because they're right, because it's theirs. Once it gets into your brain, it's yours. And I've always sort of resented things and this is sort of tangential, but like you're not allowed to use corporate logos in your work, or you can't refer to Disney characters in your work. It's like you're putting that stuff in our brains. We own it now. You cannot tell us we cannot use it. And I feel that way about any art. It's like you use it now. I did what I did with it. Now you use it for your purposes. So that's my feeling about that.
And speaking of using things, you assimilate John Cassavetes, I mean, Pauline Kael's review of John Cassavetes, and you mentioned Bone Dog, the poem, and Dodsworth. Can you tell us about those choices?
Well, I mean, it's sort of like, again, don't want to explain why those things are there, but I think that in a general sense, we are all an accumulation of the things that we've experienced in popular culture and reading, and those things, we interact with them. And so in this character's life, that's part of what's going on in his brain. That's his experience in the world, especially someone who has so little of his own actual experience because he's been so shuttered. Those elements become larger.
Correct. There in the middle of the movie, there is a movie within the movie. We have the Robert Zemeckis film. Did you have fun creating that make-believe Robert Zemeckis short?
Yeah, I mean, when we shot that film, which was on the second day of production, I mean, it wasn't a Robert Zemeckis film. We were kind of thinking more like Nancy Meyers type of thing or something. That's what we had in mind. And it was a lot of fun to shoot. It was so easy compared to everything else because, Łukasz Zal does not want to do anything conventional with his camera. But this one called for that. So it was kind of a relaxed day, knowing that we needed to have this kind of coverage and stuff. But yeah, there was no credit at the end of that. It just cut to the next scene. And in the editing room, I thought, why don't we put a credit here? That might be kind of fun. And so our assistant editor found something online. It happened to be Robert Zemeckis' name. And when we saw it, we just laughed because it's so bizarrely funny for some reason. So, we contacted Zemeckis and asked him if we could use his name, and he agreed to it. So, so that's why it's there. No dig. No Robert Zemeckis dig. I met Robert Zemeckis once. I had a very, very lovely conversation with him. He's very nice to me.
No, he's a good guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good guy.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for being here, Charlie.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I'm such a big fan of your work, and I cannot wait for what comes next. Are you might be working on an adaptation of Mankind, possibly?
No, I mean, no one's interested in that. I don't think. But I am writing something for HBO, a limited series that's going into development. Hopefully, they'll want to make it. And I am writing a screenplay for Ryan Gosling's company. So I'm busy, and they're both projects that I'm really interested in. So that's good.
Yeah, but well, both this film and Mankind have incredibly well received, both of them. So
yeah, sure. I mean, there are certainly people who don't like them, but that's cool. You take chances and you put your stuff out there, and there are different responses, and I kind of think that's good.
Hey, I like having conversations with people that don't get it. It's healthy.
Yeah, and they could get it and not like it too. That's perfectly believable to me. It's just not your thing. It's not the thing you want to watch now. I get that.
Well, at a time that feels very uncertain, and it's been a pretty sad summer, I have found a lot of solace and comfort watching Eternal Sunshine adaptation and now this film.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that. That's a very nice thing to hear.
Well, you're terrific. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's nice speaking with you. Ciao.
Ciao.